On July 4, 1947, Helle Crafts was born in Charlottenlund, Denmark. In 1969, as she was undergoing flight attendant training for Pan America, she met Richard, who was a pilot for Eastern Airlines, a part-time police officer, a former Marine pilot, and her future husband. He had been with Air American for 5 years prior to meeting Helle, during which time he had flown covert missions in Laos. Midway through the 1970s, Richard and Helle got married and moved to Newtown, Connecticut, where they had 3 kids, Andrew, Thomas, and Christina. Richard received a late-stage cancer diagnosis in 1984, along with a poor prognosis. He was in remission after undergoing treatment. Their acquaintances and co-workers were aware of the couple's troubled marriage. Helle acknowledged that Richard occasionally hit her, and her friends considered Richard as distant and very private person. In the fall of 1986, Helle noticed an unfamiliar long-distance phone number on Richard's phone records. She decided to consult a lawyer about the prospect of divorcing Richard since she believed he was having an affair. To inquire into the situation, she hired Detective Keith Mayo, who was able to produce photographic proof of the affair. When Helle met with her attorney in October 1986 to officially file for divorce, she remarked, "If anything ever happens to me, don't think it was an accident out of fear for Richard's reaction." Richard lied about his cancer in an effort to get Helle to put off the divorce, but she had called his doctor and learned he was in excellent health. On November 18, 1986, Helle returned home from a flight from Frankfurt to New York City. She was dropped home by a friend between 6:30 and 7 p.m. A few days later, Helle didn't show up on her scheduled flight for Pan America. When Richard was contacted, he told them that she had traveled to Denmark to care for her sick mother. Later, he changed his statement and said she was on vacation with a friend. As it was clear that Richard was hiding something, Detective Mayo was called in to inquire into the missing woman's disappearance. Detective Mayo started his own inquiry when the police first dismissed the disappearance. Dawn Marie Thomas, the family's nanny, admitted to Detective Mayo during their interview that she had seen a brown stain on the carpet in the bedroom not long after Helle vanished. Later, the carpet was pulled up for no apparent reason. Dawn also observed that a recently bought sizable freezer from the garage was also nowhere to be found. Dawn also informed Detective Mayo of Richard's insensitive behavior from November 19. Due to a localized power outage, she told how he had taken her and the kids to his sister's house, where he said Helle was already present. On arrival, though, Richard didn't appear really concerned about where his wife was, and Helle was nowhere to be found. The investigation eventually involved the police, who looked into Richard's credit card history, which revealed he had rented a U-Haul truck and a wood chipper just before his wife vanished. The night after Helle was last seen, at around 3:30 a.m., a snowplow driver came forward and claimed to have spotted a wood chipper on the bridge that crossed the Housatonic River. He asserted that a man in an orange poncho had been standing nearby and that, an hour later, he had observed the same wood chipper on River Road. Investigators escorted the driver to the precise spot where he had seen the wood chipper in order to gather evidence. They found wood chips, an envelope with Helle's name on it, blonde hair strands, tiny bone bits, blue fibers, a piece of metal, and a painted red nail while searching the riverside. As the divers were searching for evidence in Housatonic River, they found a chainsaw with hairs and fibers stuck in the teeth matching the ones found on the riverside. Its serial number was scraped off in bits, but the investigators were able to put together the scratched-off serial number, which read 5921616, same as the warranty card number sent in by Richard. Then, in an effort to link the things discovered on the riverside to the Crafts family, a search of the residence was carried out. The nail polish on the nail matched a bottle found in the house, and the hairs found matched those in Helle's hairbrush. Dental X-rays confirmed that the metal fragment was actually a crown from one of Helle's teeth. The story gained international attention as the inquiry progressed. The state attorney turned the investigation over to the state police on December 26, 1986, while Richard and the kids were in Florida visiting family. Dr. Henry Lee, a famous forensic investigator, was hired by the state police to analyze the gathered material. He was able to find 5 microscopic bloodstains on the mattress that matched Hell's blood type. Based on the path of the bloodstains, he deduced that the missing woman had been struck by a blunt force item. Blood was also found on bathroom towels in the house. In order to prove that the bones pieces discovered on Riverbank were of Hell's, he used the same wood chippers to cut dead pig bones. He demonstrated how the distinctive groove created by the wood chipper matched those on the bone fragments. Human remains were also discovered in the back of the U-Haul Richard had rented. The lost freezer was never discovered. Richard was questioned and had a polygraph test on January 5, 1987, which he passed. Hell Crafts was declared dead on January 13, 1987, and on the same day, Richard was detained on $750,000 bail after being arrested. Because of the media attention, the case was relocated to New London, Connecticut. The chain of events was laid out for jurors to claim that Richard didn't want a divorce, and that's why he killed Hell Crafts. Richard had placed a new freezer order on November 13, 1986. The dealer, who was called to appear in court, claimed that Richard had insisted on paying in cash and picking up the freezer himself, but had refused to provide his name or address. Dawn was called in to testify as well, and she informed the jury that she had overheard Hell and Richard fighting on November 14 and noticed that Hell had become very distressed. Prosecutors claim that Hell put the kids to bed around 8 at night of her disappearance, then changed into her blue nightshirt, whose fibers matched those recovered on the riverbank. Richard had entered her room and used his police flashlight to hit her twice in the head before covering her body in blankets and putting it in the freezer in the garage. Richard came home after dropping Dawn and the kids off at his sister's house. He then removed Hell's body from the freezer and drove it to the Housatonic River, where he disassembled it with a chainsaw and put it through a wood chipper. There was no blood splash since the body was frozen. The chainsaw was disassembled and dumped into the river afterwards. Richard tried to defend himself in the court and denied killing his wife. After the jury deliberated for a few days, the case was declared a mistrial because one of the jurors was unable to find Richard guilty of the murder. In a second trial, in November 1989, Richard was handed down a sentence of 50 years in jail with eligibility for parole in 2022. The trial was the first in Connecticut to permit courtroom cameras, and it resulted in the state's first murder conviction without a body. Hell and Richard's children stayed with friends after their father was arrested. 2 of their friends started a campaign to gather money for the kids. Karen Rogers, Richard's sister, finally adopted and raised the kids, believing her brother murdered her sister-in-law. Richard appealed his conviction in 1993, arguing that the circumstantial evidence was insufficient to support a conviction and that he hadn't been able to have a fair trial due to the media attention. The conviction was upheld by the state Supreme Court nonetheless. During this year, he also requested access to his deceased wife's estate, and that was also denied. The case served as the basis for the Fargo movie by the Coen brothers in 1996. Keith Mayo died in 1999 as a result of injuries in car accident.